Mike, thanks for coming back to the show. How you doing today?
Hey, it's great. It's great to be here. I love talking with you, Cole.
That means a lot. That means a lot coming from you. For folks that don't know who you are and why that would mean a lot to me, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your past in Illinois cannabis?
I have no idea why it would mean a lot to you, but I am the one-time editor of a publication called Grown In, which was a cannabis industry news publication. And before that, I've been a reporter on a lot of other things, and I've also worked in politics in a lot of different ways in Illinois and Washington, and worked in the news business generally, not just as a reporter. So, yeah, here I am.
Yeah, and last time I'll answer you why you are so important in my mind. But last time we talked, I also learned that you were privy to some of the nation's most critical secrets, the nuclear stuff, or you were at the Department of Energy, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the secrets. I mean, it's not
I'm
like
honestly just trying to make you laugh.
Drawer full of secrets that you would go through.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of people that knew a lot of things about that, and working at the U.S. Department of Energy was a fantastic experience and a fascinating place. A lot of people don't know that the Department of Energy is really two different departments. One is the part that actually does energy, which is where I spent most of my time, and the other part is the part that manages the nuclear weapons, and not only manages them but also produces them and pays for scientists to devise them. Like one of the things that I loved is that Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico actually has a PhD program for nuclear weapons. But the thing is that when you make your PhD thesis in this program, it's classified. So only like 6 or 7 different scientists see it, and then it's gone forever. And you do it so that you can then become somebody who works on nuclear weaponry, which is a crazy, insane, fascinating thing to me. And all this stuff, by the way, that you've been hearing about, the fusion project at Lawrence Livermore Labs, that started when I was at Department of Energy. So it's been going on for like 25 years. And I remember them talking about building the National Ignition Facility. Fascinating. I mean, the idea that you have these hundreds of lasers all pointed at one diamond, it just blows my mind.
Well, and we have to, since you just brought it up, can you give us just a quick synopsis of the breakthrough that you just referred to with regard to energy?
The National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore Labs in Berkeley, California, they just announced that they managed to actually have a fusion reaction where the amount of energy that went in to a reaction was less than the amount of energy that went out. And the way that it works is that they literally have hundreds of lasers that all focus on a single diamond spot. And inside that diamond are hydrogen atoms. And they got those hydrogen atoms to fuse. So that is the fusion part. And when there is fusion, they then have a reaction that throws off energy. And the amount of energy was something like 3.9 megajoules that went out, which is about the amount of a stick and a half of dynamite. So you think stick and a half of dynamite, oh no, that's a lot. It's a lot, but in terms of energy terms, it's probably enough that you could turn on the lights in about 1,000 homes, which is not a lot. In the scheme of things. And what you need to be able to do is have it happen continuously so the lights are on all the time. So anyway, I love that stuff. It's fascinating. It's another thing that's out there.
And just so that I understand, am I correct in saying that the breakthrough was that we got more energy out than what we put in?
Yeah, more energy out. So the amount of energy that went in was like 2.5 megajoules, and the amount of energy that went out was like, don't quote me on the numbers, like 3.2. So this
I'm
has nothing to do with cannabis, but
no,
it
it
is.
doesn't. But you never know what you're going to talk about on the Chillinois podcast, and I'm just happy that I actually put two and two together there, because that's the breakthrough, that we're getting more out than what we put in. And am I
That's
correct
right.
in saying that if we learn how to control that, well, that could be a really good thing for us as a
Yeah. Yeah.
civilization.
If we could do it repeatedly, yeah. I mean, basically the way the sun works is fusion, and that's why the energy comes out for the sun is that there's a constant fusion reaction. But the thing about the sun is that inside the sun, it's very, very, very high pressure and very, very high temperature. So, that's a different circumstance than we have on planet Earth. And so, with the National Ignition Facility, they were pointing all these lasers at this spot to attempt to make a tiny, tiny space that has, a scenario that's like the core of the sun. So really cool, really so cool. And there's places like that all over the place. I've been able to go to Argonne National Laboratory here in Illinois, and also the Fermi Lab when they were still running the accelerator in Illinois. Just crazy, amazing places with just people whose brains are just, like you can warm your hands by their brains. They're just so smart. It's
Yeah.
really, really cool. And just a lot of people don't know how amazing and awesome the U.S. Department of Energy is. It's basically almost all of the major basic science discoveries come from the U.S. Department of Energy, all of them in the United States and mostly the world. But Europe has a little bit of that now, and China's sort of getting there. But it's really, really the Department of Energy finance stuff. Even a lot of the funding for the National Institutes of Health. So for instance, the whole gene sequencing project that was done about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that was all paid for by the Department of Energy. So much amazing stuff that comes out of there. So we should give lots and lots of money to the Department of Energy. They do amazing things.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, maybe sometime it sounds like you've got a lot to say about that. Maybe sometime we should just sit down and talk about the Department
I
of
love it.
Energy.
It's really cool. It's really
Well,
cool.
so anyways, back to why you're so big in my mind. I didn't
Okay.
forget that. I wanted to tell you that. And I think you're big in other people's minds is you did excellent reporting. So that's, I think, for everybody, while you're, in the forefront of their mind when it comes to Illinois cannabis. But for me, you mean so much to me, because not only did you do excellent reporting, but you would come on my show and help me break it down, because it was
Oh,
hard to keep up with,
it
So
is. There's a lot going on all the time, isn't there? Yeah.
yeah. And even as I look back at your reporting, because I'm doing a research and analysis project right now where I break down all of the stories in the history of Illinois cannabis and try to analyze it and kind of string it together, into a single fluid story. And even as I look back at your reporting now, what happened in Illinois cannabis and what continues to happen is just so confusing. And I think you even said in a podcast we did in the past that it's just weird in Illinois. The way
Yeah.
the way the
Yeah.
state does things
Yeah.
is
Well,
weird.
Illinois has a difficult system. The 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 way that cannabis is managed in Illinois is very, very heavily reliant on the legislature, and that's how the legislature set it up. So the administration doesn't have a lot of leeway in terms of making changes. Um, you know, well, at least it's not Missouri, where almost all of the laws have been encoded into the Constitution, as a result of the two referendums that they have. So in Missouri, there's almost nothing you can do, nothing anybody can do unless you pass another referendum, which is, an enormous amount of work. I don't know how they're going to handle it. Um, and I think that's a little bit of what Governor Parsons was saying when he said months ago that the whole thing is a mess. I think that's what he called it. And then very quickly backed off and didn't say anything else about their cannabis referendum. But it was pretty clear that he was talking about the fact that it's all going to be based in a constitutional amendment, which is going to make it very hard for them to make any changes. In Illinois, cannabis, as you know, Cole, is really complicated. And there's a lot of little details that make a huge difference for a large group of people. And you have to be able to understand those little details in order to be able to, make a little change. And the legislature, they've got a lot of other things going on. Legislatures aren't well known for cutting with a scalpel. They're known for meat cleaver kind of responses. And so here we are, you know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was struck by as I turned back the page, looking back to Governor Quinn's days, was that it's not exactly the same, but it seemed like the licensing rollout was pretty goddamn similar. And by that, I mean behind closed doors, where nobody really knows what's going on. And then when the results did come out, it was found that many people had connections. Well, so for the first license rollout, I think there was one connection to the Quinn administration, a former staffer. But like with the initial rollout of adult use cannabis, we see other connections, and it just seems like the same thing is happening again and again. Do you share that view? Like, do you see the similarities that I'm drawing between the rollouts?
Well,
I guess
I think the Pritzker administration has really tried very, very, very hard to bring transparency. They've had a lot of things working against them. I think the first is that they did not anticipate how complicated the application process was going to be. And they were really, really sorely staffed in terms of the number of people working for them. I mean, the number of people working on cannabis in Illinois in state government, I think, is definitely under 50 and maybe under 30 in terms of the number of people working on it. And so, you compare New Jersey, I think, has 100, and Michigan has well over 200 people working on their regulatory aspects. So, I think Illinois really, really, really underestimated how hard this was going to be. And so there were a lot of kind of boneheaded mistakes that were made because there just, weren't enough people looking at things and not enough experienced and knowledgeable people to do stuff. I think the other part is that, when you have a system that is not as well considered and thought through as Illinois', you get people who know how to game the system. And, that I think that's a lot of what happened. I mean, a lot of the applicants knew how to pay close attention and what sort of things you need to do in order to be able to win a license and get a license. And I think that there was a lot of that. I don't really fall into the camp that there was conspiracy and that there was insider stuff that was going on. I just don't, I've spent a lot of time inside and out of government at all levels, and consistently the Occam's razor is that it always has more to do with somebody asleep at the switch, rather than actual corruption. I've seen places that have real corruption, and I've seen what that looks like, and I just don't see it here. I think it's really been a circumstance where Illinois' cannabis program is just way, way, way understaffed, and there's been almost no appetite whatsoever in Illinois government in order to pay for the kind of staffing and intelligence, not intelligence, but kind of knowledge base that's necessary to really well regulate the industry.
for sure. And I think, so aside, I tend to agree with you. We've had people on the past that people have made allegations against them, like, oh, you were really close to the process and you want a license. What's going on there? They asked that question, but their response when they'd come on my show is, of course we did. If you helped write the test, don't you think you'd know the answers? So right. In other words, it's not really corruption. It's just that they knew the answers that, right. So I think that's definitely important to point out. I'm not trying to say that anything like that necessarily happened. But one of the main kind of debates that has transpired throughout this. And if you've noticed, I even went back to my interviews and I would always frame the questions of like, what are your thoughts on this? I'm not necessarily asking your opinion on it because I never knew as a reporter how you felt about people asking their opinions. Today, I'm asking your opinion
Okay.
on open licensing versus limited licensing or more open licensing, however you want to term it. JB Pritzker at, I believe it was the Green Rose. I don't know. There was, or no, I think it was Ivy Hall. Anyways, he gave a speech saying that there are some people out there that will say that, you know, just open up the market and then we'll see more social equity happen. He said, first of all, we're seeing social equity happening through the expungement process and everything else, which I acknowledge that's good stuff, social equity. But he addressed the main point here, which I'd love to hear your take on. He said, if we just issued a bunch of licenses, we would edge people out of the market and thus not allow equity to happen. He said by limiting the licenses, and I'm going off the top of my head right now, by limiting the licenses, you will allow equity to happen. And so what I'm asking you today is, in your opinion, is equity, is the definition of equity, does that mean that you should be able to make a bunch of money off of like a piece of paper, or is like the definition of equity allowing all people to participate in this new and burgeoning industry while also ending all policies that caused this situation in the first place? I know that was a long question.
All right. Well, before I give you my opinion, let's just talk about, you know, what's going on in other states, right?
Sure.
So Michigan has a system where it's pretty easy to get a license from the state. The difficulty is then finding a municipality that will allow you. And that's becoming harder and harder because there's few municipalities that are allowing licenses. But up to this point, there are a lot more licenses in Michigan than there are in Illinois. You know, I'd say there's probably 3 times as many. And the result is that there's an enormous number of just people that are operating in a deficit. And there are people who are trying to unload licenses for free. You know, like, you can have my license if you take on my debt. There's a lot of that in Michigan, a lot. And the other is that the amount of cannabis that's been created in the state that's being, you know, manufactured and grown is just way off the charts. And so the prices are dropping like mad. Like, you know, I've been told stories of $700 a pound, which blows my mind. Because, I mean, really, if you're growing it indoor, you can't really do it for less than 1,200. And you got to be really, really, really sharp in order to do it at 1,200. And I'm betting a lot of these people are not that sharp in terms of their efficiency. So it means a lot of people are losing money, a lot of money. And what's also interesting is that this was clear as long as a year ago that it was heading in that direction. And really, like, if you looked at actually the harvest season in 2021, it was pretty clear that it was going to happen. And yet, more and more giant cultivation facilities were completed and built in Michigan. All right, Michigan. Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a very controlled license process. You know, it's relatively easy. You can get a license pretty much anywhere you want, but you have to go through a process with the state. The state is very slow and has really constricted the number of licenses. But they allowed a lot of licenses to go through very quickly. And a very similar kind of market situation is Michigan. Not as bad, but very similar. And you can track it almost exactly to about a year and a half ago. Massachusetts, there were a lot of complaints about how fast Massachusetts was allowing new licenses. And then all of a sudden they started letting in new licenses. And so now here we are. Massachusetts, also very similar situation. You know, you can find cannabis for $800, $900 a pound. There's a lot of people losing a lot of money. New Jersey. So New Jersey is relatively new, and they only really started handing out licenses this summer. But it is a very constricted process in order to get a license. The state is taking it very slowly, and not only that, but it's very, very hard to cite a license, particularly for grows. It's very, very hard to find a location for a grow because towns have to approve it. There's a lot of towns that have opted out. And not only that, there's a New Jersey has a very, very tight real estate market. And so it's hard to find inexpensive, good properties that will allow cannabis. I've heard stories from people that say, well, I want to grow. I have this great location, and I talked to the landlord, and he said, sorry, my bank's mortgage won't allow me to have cannabis. I've heard that multiple times. So they have a very limited number of licenses. And hey, guess what? The price of cannabis is hovering around $3,200 a pound. And it looks like it's going to be that way for a while. It's going to be very hard for a lot of licenses to come online in New Jersey. Ohio, similar kind of situation, but it's just medical. Their medical is growing very slowly. I don't know if you can really compare that. I mean, adult use, I think, basically if you're just thinking about this stuff. So, what do I have to say about opening up licenses? Well, I think if you opened up licenses in the way that they have in Michigan, you're going to get what they have, which is you're going to get a lot of licenses, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to rush into the market. There's a thing called the bigger fool. It's a concept in finance, which is, you want to be able to find the person who's the bigger fool than you in order to sell whatever asset that you have. And Michigan got a lot of bigger fools. And so, I don't know who's making money on that, but somebody is. And in Massachusetts, they had a very constricted market, it was very limited. And then they opened it up, and then all of a sudden prices collapsed. And so, hey, surprise, this is what happened. If you look at Colorado in 2020, Colorado had a steadily increasing number of licenses very quickly. And then around 2020, there was this huge crash. And, something like 250, 300 licenses just got wiped off the board, never came back. And I think, that Colorado, by the way, has an open license system. And I think that is probably what you're going to see in Michigan, and maybe what you're going to see in Massachusetts. There's going to be a lot of licenses that are going to go away, and the market's going to go, oh, that's the limit. Okay. That, no, I'm not going to create a new one. So would it benefit Illinois to open up licenses? It would benefit some small group of people who are highly thoughtful and extremely well trained and very diligent. And everybody says, "Oh yeah, I'm that guy." Maybe not. And who would it not benefit? There would be a lot of people who would be left as the odd man out. And I think that, one of the things that Pritzker is trying to say is that there's some group of people, if they're going to be successful, they need to have an opportunity to be able to build their business. Now, okay, that sounds like you're protecting a group of people in order to be successful, and that you're artificially raising the value of their licenses so that somebody will buy them. But the reality that we're discovering is that there's a lot of people who don't know what to do and are actually having trouble selling their licenses, even though, there's some value, because they imagine that it has some value of, many millions, but it actually is worth a lot less, because it turns out that building all the stuff for a cannabis facility is a lot more expensive, and troublesome, and you have to unwind who it is that owns it, and the state requires the majority owner of the license to be the one who's operating it. So you can't just hand it over to somebody else. So I think that what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be some number of people who are going to lose their licenses and are going to get nothing. And then the state is going to recycle it. And I think that Illinois is really serious about that. Missouri had a same kind of promise and with their licenses. And there were a lot of licenses that did not get started in a year. And I kept pursuing the head of the Missouri system. And, he kept Lindell Fraker and he kept saying, oh, well, we're going to give people a little extra time. And he kept doing that. He gave everybody like an extra year. And so really most of the licenses, I think almost all the licenses are operating in some way or another in Missouri. But I think that Illinois is serious about it. I think Illinois will take licenses back because they've really let a lot of people hanging. When will they take? I don't know. I mean, will it be a year? I don't know. They'll probably give people some extra amount of time. But, that's a guess. It also doesn't really seem like there's that much of an investor appetite for Illinois anymore. There's a lot more excitement about New Jersey, Virginia. New York has really cooled off because of the way that the state has set up their system. And a lot of people are still trying to figure out exactly how New York's going to work. So Ohio, there's a lot of interest in Ohio. I think that there is renewed interest in Michigan in that there's a lot of licenses that are debt laden. And if you can get something without the debt, there's a lot of potential to make money there. But, I think Illinois is going to have to go through a cycle, and we're probably not going to see where that cycle is going to go until the end of the summer. We'll begin to get a sense of it earlier, but, I'm interested to see how many licenses are operating by next March, how many dispensary licenses are operating. And I don't think there's going to be that many. I don't think we're going to have 100 new ones. I don't think we'll have 30. And the number of craft grows that are going to be operating is going to be even less. Maybe half a dozen. I think that there's going to be a lot of processors. Because I think there's a lot of potential for infused products, and that's a good way to make money. But it will be interesting because the price of oil is really high in Illinois. People are telling me $12,000, $14,000 a liter, which is shocking because in Michigan, it's down to like 4,000. And that has a lot to do with gray market and all kinds of other stuff, which may begin to impact Illinois. Now that you have more players, maybe we'll start to see the gray market in Illinois. I don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I agree with what you just described with regard to like the function of the limitations on the licenses, like I think their purpose is so that they have value, right?
Right.
I guess I wanted to ask you candidly today, and I'm really asking you because I don't know the answer to this. Where else does the government play a role like this?
In limiting things?
Yeah.
Banking, insurance.
True. Too big to, what is it called?
Too big to fail, but
too big to fail. Yeah.
But actually the government plays a big role in banking, and not only in terms of large banks, but they have made it almost impossible to open a small bank. I have a very good friend who a number of years ago tried to start a new bank. A very smart guy, had a big banking background, but it was really difficult. And the regulators, federal and state regulators, have made it very difficult because they don't like the risk of small banks. They like the idea that there's larger banks that have an existing book of business and that there's a certain amount of capital that they have. So it's very, very hard to start in a bank, which is good and bad. Like you can imagine, there would be some interesting. Wouldn't it be cool if somebody in Illinois was able to start just a cannabis bank? That would be a good thing. But I think state regulators would say, oh, maybe not. The risk should be spread out over different things and blah blah blah. So in insurance, same kind of thing. Insurance is similar to banking in a lot of ways, in which it's about distributing risk. And the federal government and state governments have made it very hard for new insurance companies to get started. Most of the time when you see a new insurance project, a thing that is connected to an existing insurance company. So it's not it's basically a branding exercise. I think there are a lot of things like that are businesses that are risk intensive and capital intensive. So utilities too is another thing. You don't see a brand new utility getting started, somebody stringing wires down the street in order to start serving. You don't see DeKalb Power. That would be cool. But so I think those are places where government really gets involved.
Sure. Thank you because again, I wasn't sure of any other instances in which that occurs. Yeah. So, and just another one on this note, and I want to segue into maybe what, you've got planned in your future. I know you got a blog and stuff, so maybe we can plug that. But I spoke to the head regulator of Oregon cannabis, liquor, and I can't think of what their regulatory body is called right now. But he was asked about, what has happened in that state, because frankly, officials from Illinois always point to Oregon. That's like, if anybody starts this conversation that I just started, they're like, look at Oregon. And
do they say that as a good example or a bad example?
No, they say it as a bad example. They say, look what happened at Oregon. The wholesale prices hit the tank. Everything you were just describing,
Right.
And I asked the head regulator, and it was interesting because he did something that no Illinois regulator ever has done with me, which is when I ask them their opinion, they say, look, this is my opinion. This is not part of my job. Illinois, anytime I've ever talked to an Illinois regulator, they will never give me their opinion. What's your favorite color? I don't know. Anyways, jokes aside, I asked him, would you have done it again? Would you have done what happened again? And he said, yes. In other words, would they have done open market? And his reasoning was, he would rather have people know what they're getting into and fail. Not that we wish financial hardship on anybody,
right?
Than not have a chance at all.
Right. I'm not surprised. I mean, Oregon, everyone forgets that west of the Cascades, Oregon is a super red state. And specifically, it's an extremely libertarian state. It's Oklahoma. It really is. And so, you look at the farming community of Oregon, and it's mostly those kind of people. And so, I'm not surprised that that's what he said. And I'm also not surprised that he's very straight up about his opinion, because I think, those kind of people, tend to call bullshit pretty quickly. And so he probably protects himself by saying, this is what I think, but this is what I'm going to do. And I think that probably a lot of people in Oregon respect that.
Yeah.
But Illinois, you can't do anything without the governor say so in Illinois. And
right.
Other states are a little different.
And you don't want to give your opinion on something and then be out of lockstep with the governor. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Maybe that's why we don't see people give me their opinion.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And the governor is not really involved in cannabis policy. I mean, this is really a third tier problem for the governor of Illinois. As important as it may seem to us, there's a lot of other things that are a much bigger deal for him.
Yeah. Well, so last thought on this subject specifically, and this is like the real one for me. This kind of goes from what the person from Oregon said, but also like from Michigan, like you name it, Oklahoma. You always hear the operators complain, and I'm not saying that they don't have a right to complain. You're talking about the hemorrhaging, the money just flying out the window based on the industry they're in. I get it. It's a part of the industry. But the one person you never hear complain, or the one group of people you never hear complain in markets like that, are the consumers getting cheap cannabis, you know?
Right.
And my thing, the reason I am even addressing limited licenses, I'm now aware, yes, this is indeed the function to artificially inflate the value of the product. Um, like I'm still stuck on what we said this was all about, which was to end the war on drugs, to right the wrongs of history. And if we continue to have penalties for possession, which we do, of cannabis, and if we continue to, enforce black market cannabis operations the way we do, like, I don't know, it just seems like we're talking about righting the wrongs of the war on drugs, yet many policies from the war on drugs are alive and well in
Mm-hmm.
Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Um, I think that's true. I think it's complicated though. I mean, it's very hard to separate the sale of illicit cannabis from the sale of illicit fentanyl and the sale of illicit cocaine. Um, and I'm particularly choosing fentanyl and cocaine because they're intertwined and the opioids generally. I mean, those things have affected my family. I know what that is. And it, the underground market will go to where the consumers are, period. And the consumers are looking for certain things, and they've developed, new types of drugs that people are interested in. Fentanyl is a relatively new kind of drug, and consumers are into that. But the same people who are moving fentanyl are going to be the same people that are moving cannabis, underground cannabis. You can't separate those two. And I think from the perspective of law enforcement, bad guys are bad guys are bad guys. And it's hard for them to say, well, for this activity, we're gonna overlook it. But for this activity, we're really gonna come after you. So I think that's a really, really hard kind of policy thing to encounter and deal with. If somebody is moving 500 pounds of cannabis across a border, chances are they're also moving a little bit of fentanyl and opioids at the same time. You know, maybe not in that shipment, maybe in a different one. And so I think that is a really, really hard thing to address. And I don't think anybody has a good answer for it. Um, and I have deep, deep sympathy for people who are upset about illegal drugs. I mean, again, it's impacted my family, and I don't know, what to do.
Yeah.
Once you get into that. So, uh, the war on drugs is really problematic. I mean, I think that the United States is doing a lot of things wrong, and that I mean, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment. The United States is making a big mistake in that it tries to separate the idea of sale of drugs in the United States from the production of drugs, and why are the drugs being produced, and why are these the circumstances. And I have a good friend who is starting a business where he's importing mezcal from Oaxaca, Mexico. And so he spends a lot of time going to Oaxaca and visiting these mezcaleros. It's an awesome name. And, the towns are just poor, 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 poor. And, the circumstances where they're making this stuff, I mean, these are the people that are better off and they're poor, like beyond like American standards of poor. And these are also the places where there's a lot of drug activity. And so, well, why? Well, it's because that part of Mexico is really screwed. And what else are you going to do? So I think that, the idea that the United States tries to separate, well, we could ignore poverty in southern Mexico and we could ignore poverty in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Peru, and we're going to say it's their problem, is really sticking our head in a hole. Um, you just can't. I don't know. I don't know how we managed to do that. And all of our policy in the United States that we have with these countries is basically bullying them around and telling them to do things that make no sense on the ground. And everyone there in those countries know that it makes no sense, but it's just a big pile of money that comes from the United States. And so they're just like, well, I guess we're going to do what that is. And I'm going to live fat and happy, and everyone else is going to be screwed. And that continually happens again and again. And it's like a big giant dragon sitting in a cave with a big pile of money, and that would be the United States, pushing everybody else around.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's an interesting point you raise that if you kind of just Wild West cannabis, that maybe some entrepreneurs might, have other substances in their cargo, let's just say.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't give a crap about the welfare of people, it's pretty easy move,
Right.
To go from one to the other.
But I guess I wanted to kind of validate your point there, because that's absolutely valid. But I guess where I was coming from with what I brought up, and I could see how you went where you went, it just seems like every provision, not every provision, but most provisions, are meant to protect the industry and not the consumer. So, for example, the fact that you can only purchase and possess limited quantities of cannabis, like, who are you protecting? The home grow thing, the fact that, licensed operators and law enforcement lobbied against that. What else are you what else are you left to wonder than, like, what are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect me? Or are you trying to protect your bottom line? And so, yeah. I guess what I was asking with that question is, you could see how you brought up, I think, Occam's razor earlier. I don't know if this is off of that, but maybe you can see how people attribute malice. Is that Occam's razor, attributing malice to things that might just be, or is that a different razor? Trying to think.
That it is attributing malice to a thing that's actually incompetence. That's often a solution of an Occam's razor. Occam's razor is the idea the simplest solution to a problem is the likely solution.
Gotcha. I was not reaching for that one then. Sorry. I was thinking of the one where people like just assume that it's a bad thing. You can kind of see how people would assume that there was some maneuvering at play.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. But there again, from a policy making perspective, Michigan's got a real issue with caregivers. And the idea that you can grow, if you have 5 patients plus yourself, 12 plants per patient, you can grow 72 plants at a time. And it's not, the growers are registered, but that's it. And it goes into a database that nobody except for the Cannabis Regulatory Authority can see. And there's no other management. That's a real problem, because a lot of those people who are doing, caregiving are actually also running substantial grows that are illegal. And there's a lot of substantial illegal grows in Michigan, a lot. And a lot of those people are using caregiver as a cover.
Yep.
So, what do you do? What do you say to somebody? You can have as much home grow as you want. Do you say it's 20 plants? What is it? Uh, I know there are people who smoke a lot, but I'm always amazed at how rare those people are. Like, I know there are people who smoke. How much do you? How long does it take for you to go through a pound, Cole?
Now that's a good question. I would say I probably smoke 2 ounces a month. So
Well, that's not a lot.
no,
No, I mean, I
maybe
know
I'm.
people. I know people that get to like half a pound a month.
Hmm, damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I feel better about myself. I wasn't planning on
I mean,
that
there's. I'm sure there's people that are smoking a pound a month. I mean, they're. I mean that
Yeah.
2 ounces a month is, it's a healthy habit, but I don't think that's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think that the number of people that are doing that are relatively few, but they have big demands and they're much more vocal and they're pushing the limits of the system a lot more. I, I
Hmm.
you know, I think you got to draw a line somewhere. And and consumers, for the most part, I think are poorly served when prices are high, and that's the case in Illinois. It's not the case in Michigan, and it's not the case in places like the Zach Huffman story when he went to um, a tribal reservation in northern New York State. You could buy a pre-roll for less than $2, $2 US.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, I mean, can you imagine if you could buy a pre-roll for $2?
Oh, I
That'd
would have
be.
bought 20. Yeah.
I wouldn't buy 20. I'd buy one at a time whenever I felt like it.
True.
Like if I
Yeah.
could just walk into a store and boop, it'd be great. It'd be like getting a
Hmm.
shot at a bar.
Yep.
It'd be terrific. It'd be cheaper than getting a shot at the bar. Imagine that world. I think that's possible, but I don't. I think that most cannabis producers, including ones that are just getting started, don't want that world because they can't afford those kind of prices.
Now, see that is going to be my last question on this topic. How long do you see this lasting? I mean, operators, I think at a Cranes Chicago thing said that, look, we kind of view limited licenses as a thing that may not always exist. And how long can we artificially inflate the value of this substance? So I know I'm asking this one question, but really like the root of that question is, are we setting our operators up for failure by not allowing them to see the true spirit of competition? Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see the true spirit of competition because I think cannabis is going to be heavily regulated for a while.
You don't think there will ever be like interstate commerce, for example? Like I'm worried about, for example, okay, so a social equity candidate starts up here in Illinois and they grow great weed that everybody in Illinois loves, but then interstate commerce becomes a thing and all of a sudden Oregon is just mass importing their cannabis and we can't compete.
I don't know what happens with that. I
Sure.
mean, I anticipate that we don't see any major federal regulation for at least 2 to 4 years. Um, and when federal regulation comes, federal changes come, I think it's going to be protecting cultivators in individual states because people have invested way too much money in order to set up those operations. Um, Now, that barrier may occur, and then you're going to continue to have underground cannabis pushing that limit, pushing that limit, pushing that limit. Um, I could see, hoop houses in Texas and Oklahoma producing enormous amounts of weed and then it being transported to somewhere else, pressing the prices down. So I think we're going to be dealing with this underground legal cannabis struggle for a while. And, exactly the color of that is going to change a little bit. But I think that, you can anticipate at least 5 years that legal cannabis cultivation facilities are going to stay the way that they are. And I think that individual states that have legal cannabis are going to be that have already legalized cannabis are going to be pushing Congress to make sure that they're protected. And there are, going back to banking and insurance, though there are systems like that that exist. Banking is heavily protected so that each state has its own system. And same with insurance. That's why you have Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois and of New Mexico. And, you know, that's why there's all these individual insurance companies.
Insights like that are huge, man. Thank you for explaining
Oh,
that. Like, I know people are learning a lot.
I'm
So,
sorry.
well, hey, here that's a perfect segue into our last topic here, because I know I want to be mindful of your time. Um, what's next, dude?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, first of
Um,
all, can you announce? I don't know if you announced it formally here. I know you've announced it, but you're not with Grown In anymore, right?
that's right. Yeah, I left Grown In, and the leading partner, Brad Spearson, we parted amicably. We're still talking to each other. I'm still a shareholder in Grown In, but I'm just not part of the operations and not running it anymore. And Brad is working on a new strategy and a new plan, and I think he plans to have some sort of announcement sometime in the new year. Um, but for me, I'm taking a little bit of time to figure that out. I love the cannabis industry. I think it's really interesting. I want to play a role. I'm interested in some part of connecting smart operators with each other and helping people grow their businesses. I've spent a lot of time actually. What I did, the whole reporting thing is a thing that I do not because it's what I aimed to do. It's because, well, hey, can you do that? Yeah, sure. All right, you go do that. I have an MBA. My background is in operations and analysis, and I've spent a lot of time helping people try and purchase and put together media companies. And I'd like to do similar sort of work for cannabis as well. And I think I've met a lot of good operators. I think I've met a lot of bad operators. And I learned a lot about their businesses and have a pretty good sense of the bullshit meter. And I'd love to keep doing that. So
Very
that's what
cool.
I'm working on. I don't really know exactly what it'll be, but maybe you'll have me back on some other time and I can tell you what that is when I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll have you back on as Mike Fouché, cannabis consultant.
That'd be
Sounds like,
fine. That'd
yeah.
be fine. Uh, but anyway, I think the cannabis industry has a tremendous amount of promise, um, but I think it's still going to go through a lot of convulsions, between now and whatever that endpoint is in the future.
Yeah. And for folks that are listening right now, it's easy for me to ask these questions. Let's just use home grow as an example. When prohibition was no longer a thing for alcohol, it's not like people were allowed to home brew the next day. In fact, I think it took until President Carter,
Is that right?
before people were allowed to brew at home.
Fascinating. Yeah, I've
So,
done that too. I actually have a really good friend. He and I started home brewing together. He got better and better and then quit his job and started a brewery. And so now he has a substantial brewery in North Suburban Chicago. So if you ever have a chance, go to Hubbard's Cave in Niles, Illinois. It's fantastic. And that's my
hell
buddy
yeah.
Jerry. And started in my kitchen.
You said Hubbard's Cave?
Yeah, yeah.
Hubbard's Cave in Niles, Illinois, folks. And before we go, I'll just show really quick on October 14th, 1978, Jimmy Carter signed H.R. 1337.
Wow. Huh.
That
Sponsored by
amendment.
Alan Cranston, of all people. That's fascinating. Alan
Yeah.
Cranston. Yeah.
So it basically created
Oh,
an exemption from taxation of beer brewed at home for personal or family use.
right.
Essentially, it lifted regulations imposed by prohibition over 50 years previous.
Wow, that's really cool. Huh.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I wonder, yeah. His brother had a beer. I don't know if you his so the This is, I'm going to show my age. Uh, One of the things about Jimmy Carter is that he was always plagued by his brother, Billy, who was like a total doofus.
Okay.
And I think he had Billy beer, is what it was called. And so I think that's probably connected to that. And everyone was making a joke about Billy and Billy beer and all that stuff. So I wonder if I wonder if that he made it as part of that, the
Yeah.
craft beer. It's interesting.
Yeah, I felt like it was important to, make that distinction, because in some ways you could say that cannabis legalization has gone further than, the prohibition of alcohol in some ways. And by that, I mean, in Illinois, we have home grow, and that was
Right.
only, 5 or 6 years after we legalized medical, which, like I say, when you compare the timeline for prohibition, that's a quick turnaround to give
Yeah.
people that right.
Yeah.
So,
When you look at it from history, that's a good point.
yeah. Gotta love history. Well, I think that's one thing we will always relate on, history nerds. Mike, I'd love to have you back on in the future. As always,
Thank you.
it was a pleasure to speak to you. Did you want to plug your blog at the end, or is that not really
No.
anything? Okay.
No,
If people find it, they find it,
yeah,
whatever.
that's fine. That's fine. Use the Google machine.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Chillinois, we hope you found value in this episode of this podcast. And, I'd tell people to look out for you on Twitter or stuff, but who knows how long that's going to be around. So if you want to connect with Mike Fourcher, just Google him.
Yeah, we'll see how long Elon keeps that going, right?
Yep.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here, Cole.
Absolutely. Well, till next time, Mike. See ya.
Thanks.